This video is sponsored by Squarespace, an all-in-one platform to build your own website, shop, or portfolio and create a compelling online presence. Hello artists and antichrists, my name is TVSkyn, and for someone who runs a channel all about art and animation in video games, I really haven't done a lot of videos about the art of League of Legends. Riot Games, by virtue of the unspeakable billions of dollars they hoover out of the pockets of their audience every year, has the money to retain some of the best artists in the games industry and, when that's not enough, to outsource their artwork to some of the most accomplished art studios in the entire world. And for all that I have my criticisms, many truly so many criticisms of the art direction and the character design and the choice of aesthetics that Riot uses in its products, there's no denying the sheer craft of the people that it pays to create its artwork. So, in this video, I want to count down the top 10 most beautiful splash arts in the entire game. Well, I wanted to do that, but then I had to actually narrow it down to just 10, and I couldn't, because holy shit, there's just so much good art in this video game. So it's top 15 instead, and believe me when I say that narrowing it down even that much was painful. There's gonna be a lot of gorgeous art that I'm gonna miss out on in this video, and I fully encourage you to share in the comments what you think the most beautiful splash arts are, and why. All of my videos are by necessity subjective, that's how criticism works, but this video is gonna be more subjective than most because beauty truly is in the eye of the beholder. I've tried to select a list here with variety and diversity, showcasing different kinds of beauty, and even though it's a numbered list, it's not a hard scientific ranking, it's more like vibes, really. Don't take this as like an objective, this one is definitely better than that one kind of listing. Any one of these could be in any spot on the list. Well, except the number one. The number one on this list, I will defend as the one I actually find the most beautiful out of everything in the game. There's also going to be a lot of recency bias on this list, no King Rammes or Scuba Gragas here, because splash art quality is one of the things that Riot has invested really heavily in over time. The splash is a big part of how they sell the skins, after all, and so the quality has gone up pretty linearly as a function of time as they have had more and more money to invest in its production. Now, for the criteria, I'll explain more as we touch on each individual piece, but the stuff that I am usually looking for when I'm looking for beauty is not just whether the character looks good or looks cool, but whether there is a compelling composition, interesting storytelling, and perhaps, most importantly for me, interesting use of light. Beautiful colors is one thing, but I think it's contrast that can truly make or break it. All of this to say, don't get mad if your favorite splash art isn't on the list. Your list, if you choose to make one, is probably about as true as mine is. That's one of the wonderful things about criticism. There is more than one truth to discover. Most of the entries on this list will be skin splashes, which makes sense because there's just way more of them. But the base splashes don't slouch either, and Kindred is a great example. I said that use of light is really important to me, and, well, here you see why. What's really clever about Kindred's splash art is that it's doing the opposite of what you would normally expect a character's splash art to do. Splash arts are supposed to showcase the character, after all, and so usually the character will be the focus of the light in the scene. But Lamb and Wolf here are in the shadows, peering out at us from the dark, and what's being highlighted instead is the person they've just claimed. This victim was taken by Lamb's arrow, no chase and feast for Wolf, and it is Lamb's gentle touch that lies on their breast, and it is that arm that leads our gaze up to her mask. And you get the clever little gag here, right? The light is supposed to highlight the character, and here it is highlighting death, which is what the Kindred are. But just in case that's too subtle, the blue glow from Wolf's mouth illuminates the face of the corpse, which is otherwise hidden in shadow. And that glow paints an X-ray effect on it, peeling back the skin of the lips and the cartilage of the nose, and hollowing out the eye sockets. The skull is perhaps the most universal signifier of death in visual art, and Wolf paints that skull on the body just with his own presence. There's a strange intimacy to the scene. Not just Lamb's gentle hand on the dead person, but also the curling shadow of Wolf's body shading her almost protectively. And looking at the scene, it almost feels as though you've interrupted something. Something quiet, something personal, something that's important to them. and it would almost be awkward if not for the intensity of Lamb's gaze and that almost gleeful, toothy grin in Wolf's open maw. You've caught them in a quiet moment, but you have also caught their attention. That's the other clever play with light in this scene. The glowing eyes of the two give them a look like animals disturbed in the wild, like the glint of the eyes of a predator in a forest late at night. It's beautiful, and it's a little scary. Traditional Sejuani is by far a worse character design than her updated form. Like, it was silly to have her riding around in a leather bikini, but this splash art is maybe one of the best storytelling artworks in the game. And let's start with the light. The light falls squarely on Sejuani and then secondarily on Bristle, as a member of the Winter's Claw has entered in the foreground and is offering Sejuani her helmet. And look at her posture. She's not striking an action pose, ready to ride to battle. Her flail hangs limp up on the wall, and in her state of undress, essentially, she looks a little vulnerable, really. Her body is turned towards Bristle, hand on his snout and caressing his tusk, and her expression as she regards the helmet is almost doubtful or a little sad, as though this thing is not a symbol of glory, but a burden that's being presented to her. Sejuani is a character who does not often get to be tender. 99.9% of the time we get to see her, she is in War Mother mode. She's all warfare and leadership all the time. But this splash art shows her in a vulnerable moment, a moment of intimacy with her best and probably only friend, a moment of uncommon softness for her. And that which interrupts it is not only the helmet, the symbol of her martial power and leadership, but also her tribesman, one of the people who depend on her, who need her to be brutal in their leadership. And when you look at that expression, the overwhelming sense that I get is that she doesn't really want to. Sejuani and Bristle are in the light together, but the flail and the messenger and the helmet are all in shadow or out of focus. This splash art isn't about Sejuani the warrior, it's about Sejuani the person, and the one relationship she has that doesn't revolve around some form of violence. And I really can't think of another splash art in the game that even tries to do this kind of storytelling. It's beautiful. This splash art is such a quiet little technical masterpiece. The scene is in a blacksmith, obviously, which means dirt and soot and rough metal and rust. To suit that aesthetic need, that need to present the forge as a gritty kind of place, look at the rendering on Poppy herself. This is one of her furrier skin splashes where you really get the sense of a bristly fuzziness, especially around her brows and cheeks, and this coarse rendering extends to her clothes as well. What she's wearing doesn't look soft and comfy, it looks thick and heavy and rough. All that damage and chipping on the tools, those burnished folds in the apron, gnarled leather rims around the hat. But Poppy isn't actually the star of the show here, not really. No, the true focus of this splash is the red-hot smithing hammer itself, whose surface is, first of all, rough and beaten, but, and this is the little party trick of this splash art, is also rendered smeared and smoothed in some places. It replicates the shimmer and wobble of superheated air. You can almost feel the throbbing heat of the place. You can see that black spotted glow of the metal from deep inside. And in terms of character acting, Poppy's calm command of this huge slab of molten metal communicates her character and her competence almost perfectly. She has just slammed that glowing hunk of metal down on the anvil in front of her, and she's giving us a look that's almost impatient, like, I'm working here, what do you want? You almost want to apologize for interrupting her. And seriously, I cannot overstate just how hard it is to render heat haze like this in a way that looks believable and not just a smeary mess. Getting that superheated glow from within the hammer right and pairing it with distortions both in the metal and the background that communicates the heat shimmer without just looking like sloppy work, that's really difficult. Get the balance just a little bit wrong and it'll look terrible, but here, the result is gorgeous. Beauty doesn't always have to be pretty, or indeed nice. The Darkstar skins portray characters the size of planets and solar systems, and getting that sense of scale right is actually extremely difficult. In order to process scale in an image, we humans need a point of reference, a known quantity whose size our brains can comprehend to measure against. For this reason, you'll see people putting bananas in a picture for scale, and for this reason, romantic painters who were obsessed with the grandeur of nature would often paint human subjects into their pictures, tiny and overwhelmed against the enormous scale of the natural world. In the age of satellite photography and international space stations, enough of us have spent enough time looking at space photography that, with the right framing, you can now use a planet for scale and achieve that sense of cosmic enormity in a subject. Not every Darkstar skin succeeds at this. In fact, a lot of them ultimately just look like ambiguously large figures floating around space rocks, or like dark cosmic Lysandra spinning galaxies on her fingers are just so large as to defy any real visceral sense of scale. But Darkstar Kha'zix, swirling out of a black void to swipe his claw over the surface of a populated world, where the exploding plumes of dust and magma tear into the atmosphere, and you can see the pinprick lights of civilizations scattered across the planet like fireflies down below. That one gets it right. That one sells the scale, the sheer cosmic horror, the awe that seeing such a thing would inspire. Kha'zix himself is not even a very interesting Darkstar design, in my opinion, but the way that he's framed here, looming over the planet, that half-open maw gleeful and predatorial, and with that swirling vortex in his chest sucking in and even beginning to tear apart the atmosphere of the planet below. It's horrible, and he is ugly, but the image is beautiful. Beauty is not always the same as realism. It's not always immaculate rendering and carefully managed realistic color palettes. Sometimes there is beauty in the cartoony, the whimsical, the outrageous, and the excessive. So, enter Space Groove Lulu's splash art, which takes the candy-coated 70s groovy disco cheese up to 11 and then some with an absolute orgy of light and color. The immediate focus in the image is Lulu's glowing staff, which draws the eyes and whose swirling vortex anchors the composition. The staff leads the eye to Lulu herself, whose orange, purple, and blue color scheme is separated wisely with the white metal ridges, making her bright and colorful but still structured and solid, which she needs to be amid that swirling chaos that surrounds her. Or seems to surround her, anyway, because for all that this is a chaotic scene absolutely bursting with action, pay attention to the actual background space around Lulu herself. It's mostly empty, filled with sparkles and flecks of groove goo, but the chaos of creatures is relegated to the bottom half of the art, where they add to the sense of crowded partying, but don't actually clutter the image. There's a lot of very careful compositional management going on here, a lot of effort going into delivering the feeling and atmosphere of wild abandon without actually making the image chaotic to look at. You have a clear and stable center, an unobstructed subject whose presence becomes a central point from which to explore the rest of the picture. And this is craft. This is the work of someone carefully figuring out exactly how to tell you the story and give you the feeling that they want you to have without sacrificing clarity. And there's always beauty in good craft. Besides which, of course, the colors are gorgeous. Like, they're less saturated than you might think. They're actually being a little restrained, which is why it doesn't feel quite as garish as, say, a Lisa Frank painting. Those oranges, purples, blues, and whites and pinks feel natural together, and the way that little shimmering lights are painted into the texture of all of it, it's, gorgeous. Before we move on, this video is sponsored by Squarespace, an all-in-one service for creating a dynamic and compelling presence online. And, since we're talking about art, Squarespace has a ton of features that can help you create either a cool and professional-looking portfolio or even a central hub for your whole online business. You can use Squarespace to create a custom commissions storefront, complete with all the tracking and administrative tools you need to track orders and fulfillment, or you can use it to host a webcomic. That's what I did with Squarespace back in the day, and while the comics that I made back then haven't aged super great. Cringe to look at them now. The site that they're displayed on still looks remarkably nice, especially considering it was put together by me, a man with the technical coding skill of a wet potato. If I can build a site with Squarespace, then believe me, anybody can. So head to squarespace.com to start a free trial, and when you're ready to launch the site, go to squarespace.com/tbskyen to save 10% on your first purchase of a website or domain. Oh, Nightbringer Yasuo, you don't look anything like your splash art. I mean, wow, this is genuinely a form of false advertising because, good lord, he looks like a Genshin Impact character trying to cosplay Shadow the Hedgehog. But we are not here for the model, we are here for the art, and yeah, this is genuinely a gorgeous piece of rendering. The objective of this piece is to depict an ashen demon bursting from the gates of hell to assault heaven, essentially, and like the Balrog in Lord of the Rings, our motif is fire and shadow. And if the image used a lot of pure black, the contrast would be very striking, but it would also make the image quite intense, and at worst, entirely unreadable. So instead, there's a gray haze over everything, washing out both the shadows and the light, and keeping the contrast in line. Second, there's no super bright highlight compared with Kindred's splash, where there's a very sharp boundary of light and shadow. Here, those boundaries are soft. There's no bright lance of sunlight across the image, just this ambient haze of illumination. It all contributes to a painterly feeling, specifically in the sense of something that might have hung on a museum wall for hundreds of years, bleached by the sun and bathed in dust. And that's carried through in the rendering style, which for all the sharpness of the final result is actually quite soft and often intentionally blurry, especially on the metal accents. It doesn't have the texture of, say, oil paint, and the little hallmarks of digital painting are all over it, like this hatching on Yasuo's cheek, for example, but it has the weight of that kind of painting. The beauty here comes from a sense of monumentalism, that menace, that this is not merely some random fantasy demon, but an embodiment of darkness itself, bursting forth, trailing brimstone and burning his own arm to ashes when his hellish blade unsheathes. It's beautiful in the play between that orange light and the dark smoke. It's beautiful in the frozen motion that it has captured, the gravity of the moment that it depicts. Okay, get your thirsty comments out of the way. Everyone go have your little simp for Troll Daddy, get it out of your systems, and then let's talk about the art. This splash is a great demonstration of what I mean when I say that for me, beauty often comes from light and composition, because check out what the light is doing here. Light draws our attention, and in this image, it draws our attention to... Like, it's not an accident that people got horny for this splash art, because literally the first thing it says to the audience is, look at these rock-hard washboard abs. And the second thing it does is, with the edge of light and shadow, it leads your attention from the abs directly towards the crotch. So yeah, if this splash art is not horny on purpose, then it has made some terrible mistakes. But beyond that, the shadow is also doing storytelling. There's a Jacques-Louis David painting. He was one of the chief propagandists of the terror during the French Revolution. He was a real piece of shit. But there is one of his paintings that come to mind when I see this splash art. Not because they are particularly similar in subject, but because they demonstrate the same property and use of light and shadow. This painting is called The Lictors Bring to Brutus the Bodies of His Sons. The light in this image highlights Brutus's wife and daughters wailing in agony over the death of their family, and it highlights the legs of the dead son being carried through the door. But Brutus himself is in shadow because he's the one who ordered them to be killed. They were conspiring to bring back the monarchy, and so in an act of loyalty to the Republic, he had them put to the sword. And in that shadow there, he looks ominous, doesn't he? The intensity of his expression is magnified. The menace of his figure becomes clear. Imagine if he had been bathed completely in that golden light. Imagine how differently he would read as a character. Now, let's go back to Trundle and ask the same question. If he had been fully lit, illuminated head to toe, would this image hit the same? Would his character feel as powerful or as dangerous? Would the composition be quite so horny? And the answer to all three of these is no. The light and shadow in this splash art and the way that they are used create that very specific mood of power, menace, and tension. They create that horny energy, and it is beautifully done. Remember how with Darkstar Kha'zix, we talked about using humans for scale in an image, in order to make the size of a subject clear to the audience? Well, say hello to Pumpkinhead Fiddlesticks. It doesn't approach the cosmic enormity of Kha'zix, but the image of a redwood-sized pumpkin man looming out of the fog, stooping to pick up a carriage like it's Hot Wheels, is pretty impactful nonetheless. The beauty here to me, though, is all light and composition, once again. And it's using a classic. The composition here is a pyramid, or a triangle, formed thusly in the image. Fiddlesticks' head is at the very top, giving him power in the picture. It makes him visually central and domineering. Everything else is below him in the pyramid. The triangle composition is a really common approach to this kind of composition. So common, in fact, that you have seen it at least 3 times already. And so common that a lot of artists use it without even really thinking about it, because it just comes so naturally. The composition anchors the image, but the light is the star of the show. This is a hazy scene, lots of spooky forest fog all around, and that fog lends the light a washed out quality. Most of the fog is colored somewhere between brown and a dirty green, but at the top near Fiddle's head, it lightens into a bright orange, almost the color of a sunset, but without a clear source. The orange tone associates it to the pumpkin head, so it becomes an extension of his power and presence. And as light tends to do, it draws attention to itself, once again pulling us towards the top of the pyramid, reinforcing Fiddlesticks' power in the composition. And besides that, the rendering is just gorgeous here. The fine detail and lumps on top of the pumpkin, and that almost mischievous pumpkin grin with slimy trails of pulp between the jaws, as though his face has literally just split open to make the expression. It's wonderfully creepy. Now, one of the reasons why a triangle in composition is so common is that if you place a human figure above the horizon line in an image and look up at them from below, they will form that kind of shape naturally. Hell, you can try that right now on your selfie camera. And it's important not to buy into any of that sacred geometry nonsense that you'll sometimes hear thrown around about it, because, yeah, Raphael loved the triangle composition, but that's not because it has any special Renaissance magic to it. It's just a convenient way to arrange an image, and plenty of people do it without even thinking about it. Now, when the triangle as a compositional element is used intentionally, it can be a really strong tool for storytelling, and like we saw with Fiddlesticks, it's a great way to establish power hierarchy in a scene. And that is very much the story of Akali's splash. It's a moment of quiet after Akali has just smoke-bombed and absolutely iced a group of Noxians, and now she's looking over her shoulder menacingly, as though scanning for other targets or daring anyone to take a shot at her. She forms a triangle shape dominating the middle of the image, and with her head placed at the top, we get the immediate visceral sense that this character is powerful. And much like how it was done on traditional Trundle, once again the light is being used to play up the drama. The face is in shadow, intensifying the expression, but that muscled and powerful back and shoulder and her arm holding the razor-sharp kama, those are highlighted, as well as that deadly dragon tattoo with its edges tinged in gold. And especially the reflections on that tattoo are just a gorgeous touch. It gives the tattoo volume and presence, as though it might leap off the back to snap at you, and it emphasizes the power of her body. Shout out to the rendering on that smoke as well. It looks thick and almost liquid as it passes over a serpent or dragon statue on the right side of the image, and as it passes over the statue, it almost looks like there's a living dragon hiding in there. And that is visual storytelling. Akali, the dragon hiding in the haze on the boundary between light and shadow. That's also why both Akali and the whole scene is essentially bisected by that line of light cutting across the whole thing. That's where she is as a person, right on the edge of the dark side. The storytelling here is gorgeous. I am, truth be told, not 100% sold on the action shot that this splash wants to get across. The idea is that we're capturing Vi right in the moment that her enormous glove shatters an enemy into the ground, but the image is a little bit too settled for me to really feel that. The posture is more one of sitting solid on the ground rather than landing, and the color streaks on the gauntlet don't quite sell it for me. Fortunately, it doesn't really matter that much. This image isn't really about that. This image is about that gauntlet. Jade is a particular little mineral. It has a certain mode of catching the light, and while it's not always quite as green as it is in Vi's gauntlet here, the mottled mineral surface texture that it has does just about the perfect job, implying not only the surface of Jade, but also the subsurface scattering that Jade does to light. Look under the eye of the face here. Look at that variation. Oh, absolutely gorgeous. And to keep that rendering consistent, even while sculpting the various rather complicated shapes of the furrowed brows and the flared nose and the broad dragon grin into the statue, this gauntlet is a tour de force. It's absolutely fantastic. And again, of course, there is the light. This scene has that bright golden sunlight which glints almost white off the gauntlet's metal, drawing our attention there first. Vi herself, her whole body, is either in shade or much more sparsely lit, making her essentially a supporting character in her own splash art. Which is why the action pose maybe doesn't matter so much. The action pose is just an excuse to put the gauntlet front and center and then render the absolute living hell out of it. And my god, doesn't it just look beautiful? Oh, hello, is that a triangle composition again? I think it is! And once again, it is working with the light to establish that Gwen is the central subject and in power over her environment. And that aspect is more important here than at most times because Gwen is in the middle of an ocean of black mist. This is her story, of course, that she is the vessel for the hallowed mist, the antithesis to the corrupting dark. And so there's a visual contrast being set up here. The black mist is these tendrils of dark that are glowing with sickly green and teal from the inside, and the hallowed mist is gentle, airy, and light. Literally light, in fact. It hovers in the scene less as a tangible force and more as an aura, expressed in a gentle blue glow that matches Gwen's hair and scissors that visually shows her influence. Extending this, take notes of the colors on Gwen relative to the rest of the scene. The tattered drapery is purple, the sewing box must be brown because it's made of wood, and there's brass accents on it, but compare those colors to Gwen, how vibrant she is, how saturated, how bright. She literally looks more alive than anything else around her. But, and this may just be me, the most beautiful thing in this art, and genuinely one of the most gorgeous things in any League of Legends splash, is that damn dress. Layered ruffles in cloth are kind of complex structures to draw, getting the interplay between their gravity and density, the way they bump up against and pull on each other, especially since Gwen is pulling on the dress and twirling it. I mean, look at how the ruffles have to stretch and expand here while colliding and crumbling together over there. Getting all of that right is hard. It's a complex technical challenge, and doing all of that while also properly rendering the diffusive reflections and texture of velvet, and then somehow also finding time to draw a cute little embroidery pattern on the dress itself that has to follow the curvature, and there are metal emblems sewn onto the whole thing which add their own complexity in terms of how their rigid structures interact with the fabric. Like, good lord, Gwen's dress is just absolutely gorgeous, and its vibrancy and its life is a big part of what makes the character seem so vital. It's also crucial storytelling for her. Her creator, Isolde, was a seamstress and dreamed of gorgeous dresses and beautiful gowns. Gwen is Isolde's dream come to life, and the dress is a huge and beautiful part of that. Stepping away from the complex technical tour de forces, here's a simple pleasure. Sasquatch Nunu takes the pair from the cold north to a lush, deciduous forest land, and the beauty of the image is, in its way, almost kind of too obvious to explain. Like, look at those gorgeous colors, that shock of orange fur and autumn golden leaves poking out from within the green, that sense of a leaf curtain being parted by Willump's spread-armed pose and Nunu lifting up a little branch away from his head. They emerge into the light in anticipatory optimism, and that casual hand from Nunu on Willump's head shows us their familiarity and their friendship. It's all bathed in the golden light of a late summer afternoon, soft shadows and gentle highlights, and a softness across the entire image that evokes a feeling of nostalgia to me, or idealistic 90s cartoons on old VHS tapes. And that softness is not an accident. The image is layered with a film grain effect and very intentional use of blurs and blurring that gives it an aged and analog feeling. There's a depth of field and a soft focus in the image, which is an artifact associated with cameras, but here it's being used to generate a certain kind of vibe, a very cozy, sort of nostalgic vibe. This feels like an adventure book that you might have had read to you as a child. It feels like an obscure old Saturday morning cartoon that you remember being much better than it really is. It feels like one of those Don Bluth movies that never really managed to compete with Disney, or an old Jim Henson production. Willump especially has that Muppet look, like they could have been extras in Labyrinth. Looking at this splash, you're not going to have your mind blown. You're not being overwhelmed with technical wizardry or compositional razzle-dazzle. It's very simple in what it's trying to do. All it wants is for you to put yourself in Nunu's shoes for just a second and wish to go on adventures with them. It sure works on me. Film grain can be used for other purposes than nostalgia and softness. On Project Jhin, the film grain is used in part to wash out the contrast a little bit, but also to add a certain technological grittiness to a scene that, between the rain-slick street, futuristic technology, and high-tech subject, could easily end up feeling a little bit too plastic and fake to be striking. But this image is striking, incredibly so, and it starts with that helmet, whose reflections and spider web of driving raindrops and that ominous blood-red glow from within captures our attention immediately. It is ringed by a halo of almost white fur and that bright shoulder piece, and you can also notice that the background behind Jhin's head, that rainy neon-lit haze, is much brighter than the asphalt that takes up otherwise the majority of the image. But the really clever thing about this splash, at least I think so, is that it has the aesthetic of realism over it. Like, the way that light and shade and that wet water sleekness is rendered convinces you, at first glance, that this is a realistically rendered image. But if we look a little closer, you see Jhin's right hand there. If you pay attention to it, it's really barely more than a stub with 3 smears of gray vaguely in the shape of fingers. You see the flames over there on the right? How they're barely more than quick scrawls on the background? See that haphazard way the rounds on his hip and the cut of his jacket is carved out of the image? Project Jhin is a splash art that makes some very careful choices about where to concentrate its efforts. The helmet, with that absolutely immaculate rendering, sells you the aesthetic of realism. The picture is drawing so much attention to it that your brain sort of takes that as a reference and paints over all the less meticulously rendered parts. It's a trick that's almost a sort of optical illusion, but it also does serve a purpose. That which you are looking directly at, the helmet, is in focus, it's clear, it's detailed. That which is at your peripheral vision is not. So the way the image is rendered mimics the experience of seeing. It puts the detail where you would see it if you were the one looking at the subject. And when the image is all about a lethal futuristic assassin right in front of you, even coming towards you, part of what makes that image so striking is that little tiny optical illusion that makes it feel more like actually seeing. If the whole image had been rendered out in exacting detail just as much as on the helmet, yeah, certainly it would be very technically impressive, but I don't think it would feel as immediate. I don't think it would hit as hard. Yeah, there sure is a lot of Alex Flores showing up on this list. Anyway, I have several friends who might actually have killed me if I didn't include Coven Evelynn here, and I can't say that they're wrong exactly. Well, they'd be wrong to kill me, but they're not wrong that this splash definitely belongs here, because, I mean, it is gorgeous. So, if you've been paying attention to what we've talked about already, you have already spotted it. Once again, an expression is left in shadow to sharpen its intensity. And one of the really good decisions that this splash art makes is that Evelynn, at least in her body language, is not at all interested in us. She is casually caressing one of the demonic entities that act as her lashers, gazing off to the side of her shoulder with a pensive, quiet expression and a playful little smile curling her lips, as though she's thinking of something quietly pleasurable or fun, or anticipating something.
But if you look closer at her face, like, yeah, her body language says, I'm not really interested in you, but that gaze, it looks just a little bit like she's looking in your direction, doesn't it? And again, if her face had been fully lit, would that expression feel as strong? Would it be quite so intense, menacing, flirtatious, if you want to read it that way? I don't think so, especially because look at her eye. Look at that tiny little twinkle of blood red peering out from beneath her heavy lids and immaculate lashes. That red works because it's able to light up from within the shadow. The light, instead, falls across the lower half of her face and across her chest, illuminating her shoulders and breasts and the gorgeous ornamentation that she's wearing. And, yeah, certainly the light is also used to sexualize her, to draw your attention to her body, but that's appropriate for the character. Evelynn is an erotic character by nature, and this entire image is erotic. Not pornographic, please don't demonetize me, YouTube, but from the smoke curling softly away from her golden claws to the naked shadow demons supplicating around her body to the lashes wrapping around her arms to her outfit, this image is about sensuousness, sensation, and feeling. So the light draws your eye to her breasts and then across the chest to the raised arm, whose brightly highlighted claws has you looking at the lasher demon. From there, you trail to that warm but disconcerting red glow as they wrap around her arms, and then you follow that down to the shadow demon gently caressing her thigh. The beauty here is all sensuous, it's all sensations, it's all imagining what being in this moment might feel like. The feathery surface of the lashers, the dappled play of light through the foliage, the shadows curling around your legs. How sharp would her claws seem, scraping gently against those naked skulls? What would it feel like to have someone like that look at you like this? The Coven skins are based on high fashion, bringing that sense of utterly untouchable, unachievable glamour into a skin, and Evelynn is probably the very peak of that aesthetic approach. She's rendered here like a goddess, like a marble statue come to life. The deeply impractical outfit with its curved metal detailing and odd feather structure are expressions of Evelynn's power, not in a sense of physical strength, but her power to mesmerize, to be beautiful beyond beauty, to present an impossibly perfect image. The eroticism in the image is doing the same thing. If you are seduced by this, even a little bit, then she has you. This is a portrait of beauty as lethality.
Okay, so I wanted to have like an honorable mentions section with like some of the other good ones, but then I went to try and pick out some honorable mentions, and it's like I tried, but I could not get down to less than 21. And if I tried to like say something about even like half a paragraph about each of them, then this wouldn't be an honorable mentions section. It would be an entire other video. So, do you want another video like this? Let me know in the comments, and let me know if there are any splash arts that you feel really strongly deserve this kind of analysis. And if the mood seems to be there, yeah, we'll have to do another one of these. God damn it. I've said before that Riot has some of the best artists in the industry, but making a list like this really fucking cements it, man. Anyway, like I said, this list was not organized by rank. It's just 15 really gorgeous pieces of art that I wanted to talk about. Except the number one. This is the one that I will defend as the most beautiful. At least to my eyes, at least to my subjective perception, this is the image that more than any of the other ones makes me sit up and take notice. The Arcana skins all have gorgeous splash arts. They all have that sumptuous gold and red decorativism, the opulence of fashion, the heavy use of geometry and symmetry, but this is the best one. Beauty here is in part the colors. Red and gold is a classic for a reason, but much more so it is in the use and breaking of symmetry. The image as a whole is essentially perfectly symmetrical. Tahm Kench is centered, his features are equal between both sides, the decoration and the ornamentation is mirrored side to side, even the banners and the pillars in the deep background are symmetrical. But then, the first thing you're likely to notice breaking the symmetry is that trail snaking its way out of his mouth, weaving across the image. Even that, though, isn't breaking the symmetry quite as much as you might think. Look at the two major curls swerving on either side. They are completely symmetrical in height and pretty damn similar in the angles and swoop of their curves as they leave the image. So the trail breaks the symmetry, but it doesn't destabilize the image. It still feels balanced on both sides. The trail, which catches our attention immediately, is also striking in another way. Inside it, you can glimpse this entirely other world, almost like a cityscape in there. And the trail itself is rendered almost completely flatly, two-dimensionally, like glass or the surface of a liquid. It looks like the window to somewhere else. Kench here is designed to look more like a classic demon than ever, and so, between the rich gold adornments and that welcoming but also kind of grasping arms out pose and that world spilling out of his mouth, the trail does storytelling for him. You can literally see him telling his sweet little lies. You can see him putting out that temptation. And with the curving shape that the trail has, it also looks like a path that leads you directly into his open mouth. Besides the trail, symmetry is broken in other places too. His hands and arms aren't quite symmetrical in their gesture. There's a crown in the upper right corner that isn't on the left. There's a star in the lower left that isn't on the right. The coat is torn in different places, and there's even tiny details like the metal teeth in his mouth being symmetrical, but the fleshy ones aren't. And it's that variation that prevents the image from feeling stale or flat. Let me demonstrate. Here is a version of the image copied perfectly left to right. It still works, but it also kind of lacks a bit of dynamism. It looks more static, less alive, and a little bit uncanny, and not in a good way. It looks more fake somehow. It is, ironically, the asymmetries that makes the symmetry so striking. Mechanical replicated perfection would be more exact, more accurate for sure, but it would also feel less real for those exact reasons. Besides that, the imagery in this splash art is just spectacular. It's a cool demonic detail that Kench here has a burning crown that hovers over the open pit of his skull, but look how the inside of it is rendered. There's almost a cosmos in there, and between that and the golden furnace in his mouth, you get the sense that you're looking at something which is only wearing a physical form, and only because it suits its purposes. And the split between the biological and the constructed is also interesting here. Compare the treated leather surface of the headpiece to the fleshy bulbousness of the jaw and belly. Compare the knobbly surface of the horns to the smooth and carefully carved metal of the golden ornamentation. The contrast between the biological and the artificial is achieved with careful rendering and a real and deep understanding of how each surface reflects and interacts with light. And that understanding is on display again in the fingers, which glow in the way that flesh does if you press a powerful light against it. So if you look close at his nails, you can see how the thickness of the keratin is absorbing the light, bending it around its outside edges. You can see the ridges of a fingerprint on his thumb, backlit from the inside. And it's this command of light, it's this command of texture and a sense for adding weirdness without going all the way over the top that really makes this image pop for me. There's a lot of absolutely gorgeous art in League of Legends, but I can honestly say that no piece of art in the game has made me stop in my tracks, has surprised me and rewarded me for paying attention to its smaller details, quite like Arcana Tahm Kench. The intentional manipulation of symmetry and asymmetry, the careful use of texture and reflection, the command of light and the sense of volume and construction, it's gorgeous. Like, I won't argue that Tahm Kench is prettier than Coven Evelynn, but I will argue that I have had a more beautiful experience with this piece of art than any other in the game. Hey, thank you very much for watching. I've been wanting to do a video like this for ages and ages, and I just never found the time. So, thank you to Squarespace for their sponsorship, which gave me an excuse to do it. Once again, post your pics for the most beautiful splash arts in the comments, and if this video does well enough, we'll do another one of these, because there's just so much gorgeous goddamn art in this game. Like, even getting it down to 15, it was pulling teeth. It was so hard, and I was swapping out the list with like different, like, no, I want to do this one instead of that one, like basically up to the last minute while I was writing this damn script. Like, do you know who has a really gorgeous splash art who absolutely doesn't deserve it? Marquis Vladimir. Like, he might be one of the most single hittiest skins in the entire game, but his art is so pretty. It is just the worst case of false advertising in League of Legends as a whole. I also wanted to talk about some splash arts that you might not expect, like Infernal Akali, for example, which uses light in a really interesting way, or the Evelynn and Twisted Fate Tango skin, because there's some gorgeous storytelling in there, but, well, now I'm just spoiling the video, so, again, leave a comment if you want to see it. Anyway, this video is sponsored, so I won't do my self-promotion. You can support the channel if you want to, but don't feel pressured to. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to have solidarity with those around you, and may the tides of history wash gently over us all.